Chief Justice Warren Burger once wrote, "The obligation of our profession is to serve as healers of human conflict." Welcome to Lawyers as Healers, a podcast exploring an evolution happening inside the American legal profession. I am your host, Dave Albrechta. I am a coach, a mediator, and a recovering litigator. In this podcast, I'll explore how and why an increasing number of lawyers are moving beyond adversarial thinking to return to the obligation of our profession, which is to serve as healers of human conflict. Over the course of these initial solo episodes, I'd like to go through my journey as a lawyer, and I want to do that in order to highlight the dynamics that led to my decision to step away from the traditional employment litigation practice that I built over 10 years and led me to step into this space of exploring alternative ways to practice. And I think in order to focus on that shift and like I said, the dynamics that led me there, the obvious starting place is law school. And even before law school, what led me to want to become a lawyer and go through that process. And I'll talk more in some coming episodes about law school itself, and I have a lot of thoughts about the way we train lawyers and things that are missing and that I think could be done better. But for purposes of this episode, I really want to focus on what my intent was in going to law school and why I wanted to become a lawyer before law school occurred. And so when I think back about why did I want to become a lawyer, the starting place goes back to my childhood, and I grew up in a small Rust Belt town in rural Ohio, in between Toledo and Cleveland, up on the lake, out in the cornfields, and I grew up around lawyers. My grandpa was a lawyer and was the municipal judge in our small town, and my dad was a lawyer. So I just grew up around it and saw the practice of law, um, as I grew up. And as I was thinking about this and reflecting back on it, I have this memory, or these set of memories from my childhood. My dad worked out of our house a lot and had an office in the house. And so I got to witness, him working, or at least was around seeing clients come and go. And he was a personal injury lawyer. And so a lot of, clients would come with actual physical injuries, and I would see them coming in and out of the house. And I remember as a kid pretending to be a lawyer. I would when his office was empty, I would go in there and I'd take a couple stuffed animals and I would put them in the client seats and I'd sit in his leather armchair and I'd pretend to do consultations. And the stuffed animals would explain to me how they got hurt and what their injuries were, and I would have a legal pad and I would just scribble lines pretending to take notes, and I would draw diagrams, and I'd have Hot Wheels cars and they'd reenact accidents. And when I think back on that and that type of pretend play, and I think it gives some insight as to what my perception of uh, what lawyers did was at that time. And it's interesting to look at it and see that I think what I really believed was I saw people who are hurt coming to my dad for help. And I knew that he met with them for periods of time. And so my reenactment of that was that I would, sit there and listen to my clients' stories. And that was it. That was the extent of being a lawyer. It was having one-on-one meetings with clients and listening to them. And that was it as a kid. And I've told many people over the years, my favorite part of being a lawyer is exactly that. I absolutely love sitting with people, getting to know them, being with them one on one, helping them navigate difficult parts of their lives and giving them a place to talk about what happened to them, which in itself can be very healing for people. And that's really the part of the practice that I loved the most. And, as a kid, I was also taught and just kind of experienced that being a lawyer was this kind of almost like public service. It was like holding public office. There was a sense of a duty to this greater good, these higher ideals of justice and fairness and equality, and giving people a voice who didn't have one. And so I held it in a very high esteem and regard growing up, and yet I had this perspective of it that was, almost, more like therapy, people coming in and talking, and that's what it meant to be a lawyer. Obviously, I didn't see a lot of the other side of that until I got older, but I think about that now and reflect back on it and realize that I really carried those ideas with me into law school. And when I think about why I went to law school, I had worked in politics for 3 or 4 years after I graduated undergrad, and I enjoyed the work, it was a lot of fun, but I really missed that kind of one-on-one. I was looking for helping people on that more personal level, and I know that I went to law school because I wanted to help people. I also, in preparing for this episode, I was curious what I wrote in my personal statement. The personal statement is the essay you write that gets attached to your law school applications that explains why you want to become a lawyer and why you want to go to law school. And so I went back and was able to dig up a draft of mine buried in my email from 15 years ago. And I talked a lot about just contributing to society and making people's lives better. And so I know that I went to law school. My primary motivation was really to help people. And I had that idea from childhood in my mind of sitting with clients one on one and helping them with difficult situations. And that's always been a very core motivation and very important to me in my practice. And as I think about that in relationship to how did I get here? How did I go from being a litigator and building a practice to completely walking away from it and searching for new ways to be a lawyer? I look at that period of time, 2023 is when I made the decision to stop litigating. And there's a whole series of factors that led to that moment, which we'll cover all of them. But particularly related to this idea of why did I even begin this journey in the first place, I can really begin to see the tension that built over time. And what happened, and I don't think this is a unique story. I think this happens to a lot of lawyers. I think it's common that lawyers go to law school to help people. I think that's a part of the motivation, even if it's not the sole motivation. I think most lawyers at least have that as somewhere on the radar of why they go down this path. And, that's great, and but it gets difficult once you get out of law school and into practice. And law school does a lot to try to retrain your brain to shift away from those more altruistic ideas, I believe. And there's actually some really good psychological studies out there that support this. There's a psychologist, Ken Sheldon, who worked with a law professor named Lawrence Krieger, and they studied students' motivations going into law school and coming out of law school. And we're able to show this pretty significant shift from being motivated by these bigger ideas of helping people and contributing to society and these bigger values to uh, by the time you come out of law school being more focused on more outcome driven things and prestige and income and status. And as it relates to specifically, helping people, you can see this shift from helping the individual you're working with to getting them the best outcome based on what the law is. And that's exactly how you're trained to think in law school. We call it think like a lawyer. And that's a real thing. And it really shifts the way your brain works and the way that your brain analyzes these scenarios. And I'll talk more about that in some upcoming episodes. But the point is, law school begins to shift how you think and analyze the world, and particularly these problems that people come to you with. And but yet underlying it, even though that shift occurs for me, I still felt the motivation to help people. And then you get out into practice, and at least as far as litigation goes, obviously there's a lot of different types of lawyers doing a lot of different types of work. So not everybody is a litigator and in this type of adversarial practice. But my experience in it is and was that the adversarial nature of the way we practice law does not harmonize very well with the desire to help people. Now, certainly lawyers help people, and this goes back to what I introduced in the first episode, which is what does it mean to help someone? And that's a really big question. Um, and again, the point of this episode, or the point of this whole podcast, rather, is to explore what does it mean to be a healer of human conflict, which, if you believe Warren Berger's quote to have some truth to it, is an obligation of our profession, not just to help people, it's to be a healer of human conflict. And that's where I started beginning to feel this tension or this incoherence between my original intent of I want to help people and the legal system and how it defines helping people. So as a lawyer, and as we're trained, we help people navigate this insanely complex system. We're taught to play by these rules, the civil rules and evidentiary rules, and we're taught all the ways to, quote, kind of play the game and get clients outcomes. And the outcomes in the civil system, in civil law, are monetary. Sometimes you get injunctions and things like that, but primarily we're talking about money and financial outcome. And yeah, that helps people. There's no doubt about that. I'm not questioning that. Is it helpful for someone to win money in a personal injury case so that they can pay medical bills and improve their lives? Absolutely. I'm not denying that at all. This is a separate question of, in that pursuit of navigating that system and getting the outcomes that the system can provide, are we also paying attention to healing conflict? Because my experience is we don't. Everything is thrown out the window except for solely focusing on that outcome. And I think that does more harm than good. Having watched a lot of clients and taken a lot of clients through this process and the journey of a lawsuit that takes, 2 to 3 years, and watching the way that lawyers behave, myself included, in that process, really exposed some truths to me, which is that a lot of times when I finished a case, I didn't feel like that person was necessarily better off, even if they won some money. The money's nice, and and it's an important part of reality. And again, I'm not denying that. However, witnessing clients go through this process was surprising to me every time. And witnessing the way that lawyers behave was surprising to me every time. and it was not in line with my intent of helping people and how I defined that because I'm realizing now in the place that I'm in, my definition of helping people is more in line with this concept of healing human conflict. And so, for example, I once had a case that was a dispute over less than $2,000. And in my view, it's not an insignificant sum of money for everyone, but compared to the numbers we're normally talking about, it's a small value case. And I took it assuming that we'd be able to work something out very quickly and get it resolved because the number was so low. I couldn't have been more wrong. The case took more than 4 years. It went through multiple appeals and all the way up to the Supreme Court of Colorado. We ended up winning. Client got paid. It was a good outcome. We changed some law in a positive way. So again, in all those ways, lawyers do good work and help people. But that case has always stuck with me because the client had to go through this process for 4 years, and the lawyers couldn't just figure out how to resolve something around $2,000, less than $2,000. And to me, that's a real sign that something's wrong, that there's something going on that needs to at least be looked at and talked about. And the the idea of healing conflict is not achieved in that kind of an outcome. Other positive things are, but not healing and not helping people heal and move on from something. In fact, I think when clients go through a process like that, they leave more traumatized than when they came into it. The other party had to pay significant attorney's fees to their lawyer and to our client. The amount of money that was spent on this case was just absurd. And that all just shows me some signals that there's something not quite right with how we're handling these problems. We're not solving the problems. So again, I look at that and I look at how our system rewards super aggressive or incentivizes, I should say, being really aggressive. We have kind of celebrated lawyers who are the bulldogs and all of these kind of archetypes of warriors and crusaders that go out and vindicate their clients and punish the other side and all these ideas that are again reward people who are fighting and not collaborating, cooperating, and solving problems, which to me gets more to healing than fighting. And so, from my personal experience, to go from a place of wanting to help people and realizing now that that was really the concept of healing human conflict into a system that there is no real space for that right now in the way our civil litigation system works. And feeling that rub for 10 years, that tension between I just want to help my client and I want to really help improve this person's life. But in order to do that, I have to drag them through this really lengthy, confusing, often traumatic system where they have to keep reliving what happened to them over and over and over again with the other side telling them how wrong they are and they're lying and they're a horrible person and all these things really traumatic, and I didn't feel like by the end of those cases I had helped that person, even if I did get them money. And so the point of this episode is to really expose and begin talking about that incoherence between the reasons that we go to law school and how the system actually operates once we start practicing. And so, if you're a lawyer or really anyone, think about something you've started, a big project or an idea you had, and the intention that you had going into that, and what happens when you're not able to fulfill that intention when you actually start doing the thing. And that creates discomfort and it creates incoherence when you can't show up the way that you intended to. And that's what I experienced practicing law. And I think that is a source of burnout and exhaustion for many people. And it took me a while to see it and name it and be able to understand that dynamic. And that was one of many. We'll talk about more as I go. But I realized over time and reflecting on my views, my perceptions of lawyers going all the way back to my childhood, realizing that, man, I really had a different hope or desire or expectation for what I could do as a lawyer. And the way that the system restricted that and prevented me from practicing the way I really wanted to, that was in line with who I am and how I wanted to show up and what I wanted to accomplish, created a significant amount of discomfort and tension, which really led me to go down this path. So, thank you for listening, and I'll encourage you to think about that question. If you're a lawyer, why did you go to law school? If you're in any other profession, why did you start that profession? And if you've felt tension or if you've stopped doing something because you no longer liked it or whatever, I would encourage you to look at this and think about this question of why did I do it to begin with? And for me anyway, it was really helpful to see that the reason I got into it wasn't translating into how I was actually doing it once I was out there practicing. And being able to see that gives me some freedom and some forgiveness and compassion for myself to say, it's not my fault that I couldn't do this anymore. It's not a weakness or it's not that I couldn't handle it. It's just that I had a very different expectation and hope for how I could contribute to the world, and this system wasn't allowing me to do that. And so here I am now trying to figure out a way to do that and to do it that's more in line with who I am and how I want to be and how I want to contribute. So, thanks again for listening. And episode 3 is coming up, and we'll get more into that law school question of what we could be doing better to train lawyers. And until then, take care of each other. Be well.